And so it begins. Donald Trump unleashing his long-threatened tariffs today, officially launching his trade war with Canada. The U.S. president slapping 25% levies on almost all Canadian goods, kickstarting his America First policy with a vengeance. Now, as promised, Canada is retaliating with its own set of counter tariffs, the country hitting back just as hard. Ashley Burke has the latest from Ottawa.
The Prime Minister defiant with a message aimed directly at Donald Trump.
Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
His comments carried live all over the U.S., where Trump claims his tariff war is about Canada allowing fentanyl across the border.
The excuse that he's giving for these Paris tariffs today of fentanyl is completely bogus, completely unjustified, completely false.
What Trump's really after, Trudeau says, is crushing Canada.
What he wants is to see a total collapse of the Canadian economy, because that'll make it easier to annex us.
And to Trudeau, what's chilling is how Trump's moving America away from its allies and closer to Moscow.
They're talking about working positively with Russia, appeasing Vladimir Putin, a lying, murderous dictator. Make that make sense.
To try and end it, Canada is striking back, slapping tariffs on $30 billion worth of American goods, like groceries, alcohol, and clothing, then hitting another $125 billion worth of U.S. products with taxes in 3 weeks.
President Trump stabbed America's best friend in the back.
The Conservatives leader says the money the government collects from counter tariffs should go into Canadians' pockets.
Almost every penny of the tariffs collected should go to tax cuts, with a small sum set aside for targeted relief to workers hardest hit by the trade war.
But the NDP's calling for immediate relief.
If you cut someone's taxes, they have no income. What's the point? I'm talking about getting people the protection in place that they need so they can actually survive.
The Prime Minister says this tariff war is going to hurt Canadians and is promising to expand EI benefits to help, but isn't releasing details yet. Trudeau also says the government plans to challenge what he calls America's illegal actions. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
Meanwhile, Premier Doug Ford is laying out Ontario's retaliatory measures to Trump's tariffs, things he's talked about before, now being put in place, such as removing U.S. alcohol from LCBO shelves, ripping up a deal with Elon Musk's Starlink company, and banning American companies based in the U.S. from procurement deals. Queen's Park reporter Lorenda Redekop joins us live in Lorenda. Ford laying out all that at a press conference earlier today.
That's right, Kelda. So Doug Ford, he came out, he walked out to speak to reporters, and behind him were flags not only from Canada and Ontario, but also the U.S. And the message on his podium, it was that slogan, Canada is not for sale. Ford clearly angry with Donald Trump and those 25% tariffs.
The battle is against President Trump.
Premier Doug Ford repeatedly mentioned the U.S. president by name, speaking about his crippling 25% tariffs, Canada now retaliating.
Don't blame the American people. It's Donald Trump to be blamed for this.
The first sign of Ontario's response? At LCBO stores, workers cleared the shelves of all U.S. alcohol, signs making it clear why that's happening. Ford says across the province, U.S. booze sales add up to $1 billion a year. He also says U.S. companies based there won't be eligible for any new procurement deals with the province.
U.S.-based businesses will now lose out on tens of billions of dollars in revenues. They only have President Trump to blame.
And he's ripping up a $100 million deal for internet in the north with Starlink, a company owned by Trump ally Elon Musk.
It's done. It's gone.
Ford also had harsh words for Musk, who studied at Queen's University.
They should be embarrassed that he went to Queen's. He should be embarrassed to attack the people that took care of him for a number of years.
Ford says he'll also soon add a 25% surplus on electricity going to several states. powering 1.5 million American homes. He warns that he expects this tariff fight to be long.
The coming days and weeks will be hard. Businesses and families will feel the pain of this needless fight. But together, we're going to stand up for Canada.
He says the premiers and the prime minister are working out other details, including potential aid for people and businesses affected. He says the legislature does not need to be recalled for money to flow to Ontarians. It's not set to return until at least mid-March, following the election. The opposition leader says she wants to work together as a Team Ontario, but she believes aid would have to be voted on.
Certainly anything to support workers whose jobs are at risk is going to require a return of the legislature, and we're ready to go.
Late this afternoon, Ford once again appeared on a U.S. TV network, saying nickel exports to the U.S. from Ontario are done, that the province will initially stockpile it.
50% of your products that you manufacture nickel with in the military come from Ontario. That's stopped. I'm cutting off everything we possibly can.
But so much is still in flux with this whole situation. Late this afternoon, the Premier's office distributed a letter that he wrote to the U.S. politicians in those 3 states where they receive Ontario electricity, talking about the potential for the 25% surplus there. He urged them to try to push for the tariffs to end, because really that's what Ford and the other politicians across this country are looking for. Kelda?
All right, thanks so much for this, Lorenda. Our Lorenda Redekop at Queen's Park tonight. Now, as Lorenda mentioned, shelves at the LCBO will look a lot different for anyone shopping there going forward. Staff at the only alcohol wholesaler in the province spent the day removing U.S. products from its stores and its website. Now, this directive from the Premier will have far-reaching implications. Our Dale Manukduk is live outside an LCBO on the Danforth. And Dale, what are you hearing from customers?
Well, Kelda, earlier today I was scrolling my social media feed. I came across a post. It was a screenshot of the LCBO's website, and it said that service was unavailable as it removed U.S. products. And I got to give a hat tip to the caption, which read, "I didn't think I'd be using the term unprecedented times again this quickly in my life." So perfectly summed up. We know that this is where we are. We heard the Premier repeatedly refer to these times as similar to the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of the response that it's going to take to get through. You go inside the LCBO, the American whiskeys, the Kentucky bourbons, we know that the Premier has really honed in on those. The California wines, any U.S. ready-to-drink cocktail is being removed or has been removed from the shelves. And you heard Lorenda mention that the Premier says that the LCBO sells about $1 billion worth of U.S. products. That's 3,600 products from 35 states no longer available. And I also want to note that these products have already been bought and paid for, so pulling them from the shelves is largely about principle, according to the Premier. We caught up with some shoppers outside of a different LCBO location to see what they think about the move.
Going back to Canadian products is not going to be the same thing, but we just got to stick together and, hopefully ride this out for 4 years or less, and then we can go back to being normal again.
I feel it's the right thing to do. I mean, these tariffs are unwarranted by the U.S. I think it's a fair retaliatory measure.
Many of my friends don't drink as well, so yeah, it doesn't really affect us. But I still think it's a good decision.
Now, the LCBO is a wholesaler to grocery and convenience stores, bars, restaurants, other retailers, so they will no longer be able to restock those American products. The Premier encouraging people to buy Canadian, but it might not be that simple. We spoke to the president of Henderson Brewing, a Toronto-based local craft brewer, and he says that the U.S. tariffs, the uncertainty of the whole situation is really hitting them hard and can soon hit the consumer's wallet.
Those can costs are going to go up, and we're going to have to make a choice about passing that cost on to consumers or eating it ourselves. And the other one, which is significant for us, is hops, which play a huge role in the craft beer business. A lot of the hops we get are from the U.S. And the challenge for us is those hops have very specific properties. It's not that we can go to another supplier and get the exact same product.
Now, he says he is optimistic about this Buy Canadian movement and excited about the potential long-term results of this trade war, even if there is some short-term pain. One of the pivots that his company is making, because they do a lot of events, they used to host a beer and bourbon party. That's been scrapped. They're going to host a beer and rye party. It doesn't have that same alliteration, but it is Canadian. We'll send it back to you, Kelda.
All right, thanks so much, Dale. Our Dominic Duck reporting live outside an LCBO on the Danforth tonight. Now, one of the biggest sectors that's expected to take a hit from these new tariffs is the auto industry. Some experts forecast the impacts will be almost immediate. Greg Ross has more from the General Motors plant in Oshawa, where they are bracing for some difficult times.
This particular situation with the tariffs has us very anxious because we feel like there's a real lack of control.
Jeff Gray is the president of Unifor Local 222 that represents General Motors workers in Oshawa. He says President Donald Trump's 25% tariffs that went into effect this morning created uncertainty for workers, with no plan on how the auto industry will continue operating under its current format.
The auto industry is very interconnected. I mean, a part will be crossing the border anywhere between 6 and 8 times before final assembly of that vehicle.
One thing that is clear, it will increase costs for North American auto manufacturers.
The way the tariffs work is if I'm shipping a part from Brampton to an assembly in Detroit, when it gets to the border, either the customer on the other side is going to pay 25% on that. So if that's a $1,000 seat, that's $250 somebody's got to come up with.
And that has many workers fearing that production may have to be halted, at least temporarily, as a result.
If you listen to some of the experts in our field, they say the entire auto industry within Canada, United States, and Mexico will be down within 7 days.
If production were to stop just at the truck plant here in Oshawa, thousands of people would be impacted.
On site at General Motors Oshawa, we have 5,000 local 222 members, plus other various supply chain plants in the area. And all those members would be directly impacted.
A lot of them young, starting families, paying, mortgages, rent, utilities, etc., and starting to get stable in their lives. And then we have something like this, these tariffs that pulls the rug out from under them.
GM's truck plant in Oshawa assembles around 600 vehicles per day. They say the majority of those trucks are shipped to the U.S. Greg Ross, CBC News, Oshawa.
Now, consumers across Canada will be affected by these tariffs, including here in Toronto. Clara Pasica has been gauging a reaction about the escalating trade war.
At this shopping plaza, Torontonians are reacting strongly to these tariffs imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump, sharing with us their fears about what it could mean for them. From fears of layoffs to fears about what it could mean for the larger Canadian economy, here's a little of what they have to say.
It's going to be really hard. It's probably going to put a lot of prices up. It's already really hard just to get by every day, especially with a family and children. So it's going to be difficult for sure.
I think it'll slow down the whole industry on building housing because a lot of our stuff comes from there. So I think it's going to be a whole new game for everybody in the city and just in Canada in general.
We're all going to pay more, right? That's the bottom line. And the thing is, we have to figure out a way to circumvent that.
I'm buying Canadian. I make sure everything has a Canadian sign on it. And you better believe it. I came here in 1971 from California, and I thought if I don't like it, I can go back. The next year, you couldn't pay me $1 million to go back.
I'm supporting my Canadian country. Of course, I'm buying all the stuff are Canadian.
I'm not buying anything American, period. I will look on the label before I buy it. If it's American, I'll put it back.
Well, I was just in there, and I overheard 3 different people say, is that Canadian? Let's look, whatever. And they were looking at labels, and it's going to take us a little longer to shop. But we're going to feel a whole lot better when we come out.
Experts say between tariffs and counter-tariffs, shoppers could start to see higher prices almost immediately. Meanwhile, many of the shelves in stores like this one behind me are dotted with maple leaves marking out products that are made in Canada. They're also playing announcements letting people know about the initiative. In this city, the mayor, Olivia Chow, is also reacting.
What we are doing already is the buy local, and shop local, working with the business improvement area so that we can support a lot of the small businesses right here in Toronto because they're going to hurt.
Many businesses, large and small, rely on trade with the U.S. They're now all caught in the middle of a trade war that Donald Trump started. Clara Pasica, CBC News, Toronto.
All right, Colette joins us with the first check on the forecast. And Colette, yeah, a bit of a rainy one out there today, but not too heavy.
Yeah, it hasn't been too heavy yet. That is certainly the case. We're kind of into a drier slot, but there is more to come. And that's going to be more consistent, more widespread, and heavier in nature. And the timing, not just through the overnight, but really puts it towards tomorrow morning's commute. So with the additional rainfall and still these mild temperatures, but the ground frozen, unable to absorb some of this rain and the melt, well, that's when we get into this risk of some localized flooding. Okay, so it's there, and that's why the special weather statement, and really that's more so for what is coming tonight and tomorrow, all right, not what's happened today. We know it was a mild start this morning. That felt pretty good, even if it was a little bit wet out there. And the current temperature, St. Catharines, double digits at 10 degrees, 7 in Toronto, Mississauga, Hamilton. Okay, you're coming. Vaughan at 3, and we've got 4 degrees there towards Oshawa. Those temperatures will be warming a little further too. So this is still some of that lighter stuff, the batches from earlier, and the more consistent stuff is still essentially stateside here in Michigan, and that will carry on and be moving through. Now, there's a lot of active severe weather associated with the broader perspective of this system in the southern plain states. However, I'm not talking about severe thunderstorms, but we do have the chance of getting a few embedded thunderstorms tomorrow afternoon. So that can locally put some heavier amounts of rainfall. I've stopped this at 5 a.m. just showing you that morning commute, not just for the GTA, but much of southern Ontario, all around the Golden Horseshoe. Certainly, there will be some dry slots again tomorrow afternoon. This is more of a risk of some thunderstorms here towards 2 p.m. and a few more back towards London. So in the afternoon, they'll be spotty in nature, but that chance there and more rain. And then on the backside, oh joy, of course, there'll be some cooler temperatures and some wet flurries to very, very light dusting. And that's coming in for the commute on Thursday morning once this system moves off. And then we'll get some nice clearing behind that and get at least some sunshine in there. So the rainfall amounts, quite a range, but say 10 to 20, locally a few areas more like 25 millimeters as this moves through. Again, tomorrow morning, it's going to be probably slower on the roads. Overnight tonight, stays mild, 3 degrees, that's all we fall to. And then tomorrow afternoon, here we go again with that temperature popping up to 7 degrees. It does cool down after that. It's not too bad though, and we'll take a look at those details a little later in the show.
All right, looking forward to it. Thanks so much, Colette.
You're welcome.
Welcome back. Police are investigating after a daytime stabbing on TTC streetcar this afternoon. Officers and paramedics responded to the area of Dovercourt Road and Queen Street West around 1:15 p.m. When they arrived, they found a man who had been stabbed. Paramedics transported the man to hospital with serious injuries, but he is expected to survive. Police are still searching for the suspect. Anyone with information is asked to contact them. Toronto's police chief providing an update today on a key concern facing the force: lengthy response times for 911 calls. Lena Harrison has more.
Fresh off a newly approved bump in the 2025 budget, the city's police chief addressing a pledge made when the service got last year's increase, that officers would respond to 911 calls faster. And he says they have, from about 20 minutes to 13.
This decrease of 7 minutes represents an improvement of over 35%, which is positive news.
A decrease being attributed to more resources.
The numbers are coming down. Partially it's because of the 306 officers that have been hired, and they've been deployed a lot of them are on the front line.
But another factor, crime is down so far this year. Compared to the first 2 months of 2024, the number of robberies, break-and-enters, shootings, intimate partner violence, auto theft, and hate crimes are all down. DemQ was asked if that's helping reduce response times too.
The two can't be disconnected. I think they are interconnected. But response times going down has a multitude of things that make that happen. Hiring is one, but trend lines on crime also are impacted by a multitude of things, which includes us getting there quickly, us gathering the evidence we need to gather quickly, and then being able to apprehend and hold those responsible accountable.
The issue of 911 response times was central to a contentious 2024 budget debate,
We are very concerned.
where the service won a $20 million increase after the police union waged a controversial ad campaign filled with stark imagery and starker warnings about their need for more money, including one that shows a man being carjacked, though 1 year and tens of millions later.
We remain vigilant as we see that carjackings are up.
This year, another budget increase for police was approved, with the mayor again citing response times as a reason, saying today a multi-year staffing plan is needed.
I said, yes, we will fund it, we will back it up, because stability is what we need, and predictability.
The increase will help police hire more than 100 officers this year, something the service says will help keep response times down. Lane Harrison, CBC News, Toronto.
It is budget season for the Toronto District School Board, with talks happening about where to find savings. And that has some parents worrying about what it means for staff at one elementary school, which specializes in teaching kids with complex needs. Ellie Chiasson reports.
The staff here know our kids so well. They work with every type of disability, and they know how to get the most out of them.
Beverly School specializes in teaching kids with complex needs.
My child, for example, is non-speaking, but they have found a way to help her communicate.
Parents consider the staff here like heroes. The idea they could face cuts as a cost-saving measure
don't want to cry.
Is troubling to many.
My son came from a typical school where they couldn't support his needs there, and we were being called constantly to pick him up, and then as soon as he came to Beverly, it all went away. They have the tools and the knowledge and the patience to know what he needs, and he's actually learning here.
For these parents, it's not just about cuts to quality of education, but safety as well.
My husband and I were so nervous. We were like, will we have to quit our job, stay at home, and be like homeschooler? Because if she's not safe in school, how do we send her? Like, she can have a seizure anytime.
The TDSB says any potential changes to staffing will take into consideration the unique needs of the Beverly School community. Specifically, the needs of individual students, classroom structure, and the number of students to ensure we are maintaining the appropriate level of support and care. Among the board's biggest pressures, like the $4.45 billion for building maintenance, is a $38.5 million shortfall in special education.
Behind those huge numbers are actual students, are actual families. I can't express enough how concerned I am with the underfunding of our school board.
To that, the province maintains no other government has made the sizable investments we have to support special education in our province and in Toronto, including 3,500 more education assistants to support special education needs in Ontario classrooms. The TDSB budget takes months to finalize and really only began in earnest this week, starting with school-based staff allocation. Ali Chiasson, CBC News, Toronto.
Back now to our top story, and Donald Trump is responding to Canada's counter tariffs. The U.S. president taking to social media with threats to escalate the trade war even further. Megan Fitzpatrick reports from Washington.
After weeks of threats, negotiations, and delays, President Donald Trump pulled the tariff trigger on America's continental trading partners. The U.S. markets didn't react well to the new tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods and the additional tariff on China that went into effect just after midnight. Stock markets plummeted when trading got underway. Trump pays close attention to the markets, and it seems he was also tuning in to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's news conference, where he announced Canada's plan to retaliate. Soon after it finished, the president wrote on social media,
Please explain to Governor Trudeau of Canada that when he puts on a retaliatory tariff on the U.S., our reciprocal tariff will immediately increase by a like amount. Trump, who has taken to calling Trudeau governor as part of his musing about Canada becoming a 51st state, plans to impose even more tariffs in early April on any country that has tariffs on U.S. goods. Those measures will layer on top of today's tariffs and on top of planned tariffs on steel and aluminum coming into effect next week. Today's tariffs, though, are all because Canada failed to stop the flow of fentanyl across the border, according to Vice President J.D. Vance.
The Canadians have allowed a lot of fentanyl to come into the country. It's not a defense to say more has come from Mexico, because way too much has come from Mexico too.
Trump is expected to promote his tariff plan later tonight when he delivers a speech to Congress. On Capitol Hill, some Republicans are cheering on his use of tariffs.
All these countries around the world have taken advantage of America. The America First agenda is to reset those relationships.
But critics like Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren say the tariffs will drive up prices for Americans and hurt a friendly ally.
We don't have those kinds of problems with Canada. They've done everything they can. They're a cooperative neighbor here. And across-the-board tariffs like this, just so that Donald Trump can beat his chest about how tough he is with a neighbor, it's not helping us. What it's doing is it's driving up costs.
The CEO of major retailer Target warned Americans today that food prices could shoot up within days. So with a trade war now underway, consumers on both sides of the U.S.-Canada border are bracing for just how hard these tariffs might hit their wallets. Megan Fitzpatrick, CBC News, Washington.
Mexico's president says multiple countermeasures are being planned after the U.S. hit the country with 25% tariffs. But unlike Canada, which immediately responded with retaliatory tariffs, Mexico is set to announce its plan on Sunday. President Claudia Sheinbaum says Mexico is already addressing the Trump administration's concerns over drug trafficking. She also says a trade war will negatively affect jobs in both countries and will lead to a price hike for Americans and businesses that rely on Mexican goods. And as we mentioned, from the auto sector to grocery store shelves, the trade war we are now in with the U.S. will have wide-ranging impacts. Metro Morning host David Commons spoke today with an economics professor at the University of Toronto to get details on what to expect.
What's this going to mean for us?
So it's going to be a big economic disruption. We have the potential to see job loss in Ontario for things that we sell to the United States, and also prices of goods that come in might be subject to retaliatory tariffs will also become more expensive.
The auto industry, the bedrock of this province's economy, 144,000 jobs directly tied to it. We've heard from the head of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association in the past on this show saying those jobs could go away. The assembly lines could shut down. What do you make of that possibility?
I think it's absolutely a possibility. The auto sector is a sector that crosses national boundaries. We see parts going back and forth multiple times before they become a car. I think the auto sector is really going to be ground zero for a lot of this economic disruption.
Do we have a sense of what kind of products we're going to end up paying more for soon, and how soon?
Right. So there's a tranche of goods that are immediately going to be subject to tariffs, and that the list of those goods has been published on Government of Canada websites. And that's agricultural goods, meats, alcohol, certain things that have very geographic concentration in the United States, where the federal government is hoping to inflict some economic pain on specific places to try and catch President Trump's attention.
So the things that are in stores right now that are among the goods you're talking about, they've already crossed the border. So presumably they aren't facing a tariff. But how quickly will we start as Canadians paying for that reciprocal tariff?
Well, for the retaliatory tariffs, I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing higher prices almost immediately. The first tranche of tariffs has already gone into effect. And in 3 weeks, we'll see another tranche of goods have higher tariffs. And I suspect that we'll start seeing higher prices for those goods, actually probably immediately as companies start trying to develop inventories.
I want to be clear. You're using the term immediately, but let me be blunt. Are people going to pay more today because of tariffs?
I think that depends on what companies decide to do. If companies decide to pass on those higher prices today, then prices will go up today. If companies decide to start running down inventories and charge lower prices, then maybe it might take a couple days or a couple weeks. But it really depends on the pricing that companies pursue. Do they pass on these tariffs immediately? But there's definitely a potential for it to happen immediately.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky issued a statement today calling last week's clash with Donald Trump regrettable and saying that Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table. This comes a day after Trump announced he is pausing U.S. military aid to Ukraine. Meanwhile, the EU has unveiled a package to boost defense spending for Kyiv. Chris Brown has those details.
Ukrainians, of course, feared this day might come, that their biggest, most important ally might abandon its military support. We've heard the word betrayal and a lot of comments from ordinary Ukrainians, although government officials are trying to sound calm. President Volodymyr Zelensky, who was admonished and humiliated by Donald Trump and his VP last week in Washington, took to social media and he said it's time to make things right. He said the encounter in the White House was regrettable and that Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table under Donald Trump's strong leadership in search of peace and also to sign that minerals agreement. So not quite an apology that the White House appeared to be demanding, but clearly some very contrite words. Will it be enough, though, to get the weapons pause lifted? The implications for Ukraine's ability to hold off Vladimir Putin's army are extremely serious, while Ukraine likely has enough weaponry to secure the front lines for a few months. The cumulative impact of losing U.S. air defense systems and long-range missiles will be extremely damaging.
Without the missiles and ammunition for air defense, without it, there will be more casualties among civilians and more damages to civilian and strategic infrastructure.
The head of the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen, vowed that Europe will step up.
Rearm Europe could mobilize close to 800 billion euros of defense expenditures for a safe and resilient Europe. We will, of course, continue working closely with our partners in NATO. This is a moment for Europe, and we are ready to step up.
Beyond Ukraine, in the streets of Moscow, we've heard Russians sounding quite gleeful that they're happy with Trump's decision, as now the Ukrainians won't have anything to fight with. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
While the war in Ukraine rages on the ground, Europe is also locked in a different conflict as it grapples with Russian threats online. Murray Brewster got an inside look.
War games in Latvia. Canadians and other NATO nations rehearsing to defend this Baltic country from a hypothetical Russian invasion.
We were about 6 kilometers that way. My whole squadron was up all night scanning our thermals, waiting for the enemy to come.
In this exercise, the Swedes, NATO's newest members, are playing the role of the Russians. There is, however, no role-playing at this headquarters. Behind these walls, the conflict between Russia and NATO is already playing out in real time, online.
Latvia has been the target of Russian cyber operations since their very beginning.
CBC News was given exclusive access to the joint center where Latvian and Canadian cyber warriors conduct operations, repelling Russian attacks on critical infrastructure, such as the power grid, the banking system, and border controls, and sometimes turning the tables, rooting out intruders before they strike.
We've had some experience engaging in what you might call a cyber dogfight, if you will, where they know that we are after them, and we know that they're on the system, and each counterpart tries to kind of kick the cyber operators from the environment.
Every operation we conduct here in Latvia is defensive in nature. We are securing their networks and assuring their systems.
Canada has had a small team embedded since last summer, the cyber cavalry for the Latvians.
They are capable of performing this work, but there are not enough cybersecurity professionals in Latvia. And then we both learn from each other.
The other benefit to being at the front lines of this particular cyber war, Canadians are gaining first-hand threat intelligence, a glimpse at Russian tactics that will protect critical infrastructure, not only in Latvia, but back home. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Riga, Latvia.
And as we head to break, here's a look at where the markets closed today. The TSX fell 429 points, the Dow dropped 670 points, and the dollar traded down at 69.02 cents US. We'll be right back. Ontario's health system is the latest to change its screening for cervical cancer, opting to test for the virus believed to cause the vast majority of cases. Jennifer Yoon has more on the reasons for the change and the broader effort at early detection.
Ontarians getting a cervical cancer screening may not notice the difference, but starting Monday, doctors will have a more accurate test for the cancer, which kills hundreds of Canadians every year.
Cervix cancer in Canada is really low because we have screening tests, but it's the highest rising cancer in women because people aren't getting screened. Here's a better test.
The HPV test will now replace the Pap test in Ontario, following the lead of Quebec, BC, and PEI. HPV is responsible for 95% of cervical cancers. And the test gives doctors a sense of whether your cells could become cancerous in the future. The Pap test only picks up abnormal cells that already exist.
We can evaluate your cervix earlier and not wait for there to be harm. So it gives us an idea of who to look at more closely and when to do that.
The Pap, you go to the little circle.
There's another benefit. A Pap test needs to be done every 3 years. HPV tests can be done every 5. But it still requires a pelvic exam, which can be uncomfortable.
I hate pelvic exams. History of trauma, cultural sensitivities.
British Columbia tried to change that with less invasive self-testing kits you can do in the comfort of your own home. But it's not been perfect. Those deemed high risk could need a colposcopy, a specialized procedure that looks more closely at the cervix. Since BC put in place self-testing, there's been a backlog.
We have been experiencing increase in wait times to colposcopy as a result of the surge in screening and the surge in positive results.
Despite that, BC's program director says self-testing does work. It's accessible and accurate. Health officials in Ontario say they're looking at making self-tests widely available once they have more data. Jennifer Yoon, CBC News, Toronto.
Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment has cut 80 jobs in a company-wide restructuring. President and CEO Keith Pelly announcing the cuts in a memo to staff this morning, which was obtained by the Canadian press. Pelly took over last April to, quote, strongly position MLSE for success, not only in today's shifting business environment, but for future growth. The memo sent to staff reads in part, over the last several months, we have conducted a comprehensive exercise across the organization to analyze the company's entire operation. As a result, the company has made the difficult decision to undergo a restructuring that will reduce our full-time salaried workforce using a combination of vacant and eliminated roles effective today. The Hockey Hall of Fame has opened a new exhibit featuring items from the Four Nations Cup. The collection includes game-worn jerseys donned by the participating countries, Canada, the U.S., Sweden, and Finland. Meanwhile, the Four Nations trophy is featured at the center of the display. Guests at the Hall of Fame can take a picture with the cup from now until the end of March break. With tennis legend Serena Williams poised to become part owner of the Toronto Tempo, basketball players and fans are expressing their excitement, saying her position will help elevate the WNBA team and basketball in Canada. But some are also questioning, does this have anything to do with Drake? Brittany Billette takes a look.
One of the greatest athletes of all time is set to join the Toronto Tempo's ownership group. These athletes say this is a huge moment for women in basketball.
It's just a big deal for just me, little girls looking up to her, even my younger self, just looking at basketball growing up. I didn't think it would even get to this stage.
I think it's pretty cool that a woman such as herself, 23 Grand Slams, is taking an interest in women's basketball.
The The 43-year-old retired athlete is widely celebrated as one of the best tennis players of all time. The champion and trailblazer made her professional debut in Canada in 1995. Now, 30 years and 23 titles later, she's set to be part of the first WNBA team in the country. The news was announced Monday, with Williams saying in a statement, "This moment is not just about basketball. It is about showcasing the true value and potential of female athletes. I have always said that women's sports are an incredible investment opportunity." Williams will join the team's ownership group alongside Larry Tenenbaum, the chairman of Kilmer Sports Ventures, and the team says she'll play an active role designing the Tempo's future jerseys and forging merchandise collaborations.
It really validates what we're trying to build here for sure. The fact that she could have chose any of these different teams, I think any ownership group would have loved to have her as part of of their team. So we're excited that she chose the Tempo.
Some fans are questioning how much Williams' ownership stake is related to Drake, the Toronto Raptors global ambassador. The two allegedly dated, and Drake even wrote a song about her.
But this is more about me and Serena.
Then, when she crip-walked at Kendrick Lamar's halftime show performance in February, many people said it was a diss at the quote-unquote Six God. So, is she taking a piece of the city as a way to take a jab at him? Right now, no one can say for sure.
You know, her coming here and him being here, who knows what's going to happen? You know, it might be water under the bridge. I think the biggest thing out of all of it is that you need that cup of tea, you know, you need that little sprinkle of spice to kind of like stir the pot.
I'm hoping there's no connection whatsoever and she just genuinely wants to help support women's basketball.
Regardless of whether or not Drake has anything to do with it, there's high hopes that her role with the Tempo will help grow basketball in Toronto and beyond.
She's won her entire life and is a high performer. So I think naturally she's going to bring a level of excellence and expectation and belief in what this franchise can do.
The Tempo begin their inaugural WNBA season in May 2026 at the Coca-Cola Coliseum. Brittany Blatt, CBC News, Toronto.
Colette is here with your extended forecast. And Colette, as you mentioned, a little bit of rain today, but we're going to see more as the week goes on, right?
Yeah, it's really the kind of heart of the system, if we put it that way, is coming in overnight tonight and into tomorrow. So this has been light stuff, kind of child's play with the shower activity, and we will get that heavier rain pushing through overnight tonight, consistent tomorrow early morning for the commute, yes, and then it becomes a little bit of sort of in waves after that. So just showing you what's happening with that special weather statement that is in place from Environment Canada. I've been talking about it for a while, of it being upcoming, and it's really for what's happening tonight and Wednesday. And that's just, the ground is still frozen. I know we've had some mild days, but it's frozen. It can't absorb, even if it's not enough rain to be a rainfall warning, it's hard for it to absorb it with the runoff too from some of the melting snow, some of the tributaries, you know, these rivers, and we'll find them rising with the rainfall coming on through. So localized flooding is a concern and something to be cautious of, especially if you live near a body of water, some of these rivers and streams. Okay, now looking forward in terms of how this plays out, there's that more consistent, widespread, heavier rain, and I've stopped this at 6 a.m. So yes, for the beginning part of the commute, but it carries on right through kind of 8 a.m. to 9. And then behind that, there are these waves. And by afternoon, what you see here, there doesn't look like there's much left as you check out this model. But what is there? Some of those maybe little pop-up thunderstorms kind of pushing through with this system. And so it's highly localized, but that would be some heavier amounts of rain. And you might hear the rumble of thunder. And here we are in early March. Then what you might expect in early March is what comes on the backside of this is when we get a little bit of mixing, perhaps even a bit of freezing drizzle or a little freezing rain like we had early this morning. And this is on Thursday morning for the commute. A few wet flurries kind of coming through and eventually getting some clearing of that system passing on by. So our rainfall accumulation, you can see southwestern Ontario, like the Windsor area, that's where could be one pocket where it's more like 25 to 30 millimeters. Toronto, more like 15, but locally around the GTA, there could be that 20 to 25. So overnight tonight, mild, 3 degrees, 7 tomorrow, very mild indeed, but breezier on Thursday with some cooler air pushing in. And I've kind of talked about how it cools down, but it's not extreme cold. And by next week, we'll start warming back up again. So there you go.
Up and down again, right?
Yeah, this is the ride.
Yeah, thanks so much. And that is all the time we have tonight. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.